It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. If you're just joining us, appreciate your attendance this morning. We have been reviewing some information and issues. We're in the third of four segments this morning, and we've been looking at some issues surrounding Common Core and some of the current news that's out there in reference to the Ukraine and the standoff that's happening there, and our role in it and how all of that plays together. There is an article out there on CNS News this morning, and if you don't use CNS News on a routine basis, I would encourage you to do that. CNS as in Charlie November Sierra, cnsnews.com. They are an alternative media solution that gives you something other than the Ministry of Propaganda is feeding you on a routine basis, and I really like their site. They have some neat insight, and I just, I don't believe anything from any media outlet completely, but I do constantly seek to find alternative sources, and CNS News is one of them. One of the Russian envoys to the UN cast out a scenario the other day that I thought was interesting because it caused me to think and to take a position that ordinarily would, your immediate off-the-hip response doesn't generate. He came into the UN on Monday, and the comparison that he drew when he was, of course, being challenged by everyone, including the pathetic and shameful Samantha Powers. She's been talking tough here in the UN, but I have no respect for Samantha Powers at all. She is an ideologue. She is a person who has shown herself to be invested in the destruction and the ruination of our nation. And that Samantha Powers is, in my opinion, a very, very dangerous person. One, because of the power she wields, and two, because of the ideology she clings to. But this Russian ambassador threw out a scenario that put a new twist on the question for people's minds. And he compared the situation in the Ukraine and said, well, suppose for argument's sake that President Obama was often vacationing in Hawaii at a cost of about $7.5 million to the American taxpayer. And while he was gone, Mitt Romney shows up at the White House, goes into a joint session of the Congress, and the Congress impeaches the president while he's on vacation in Hawaii. His question was, would that be legal? Would it be constitutional? Would it be democratic? Now, I'm not giving the argument credence because that's not exactly what happened in the Ukraine. First and foremost, this wasn't the president on vacation, Yanukovych, the current president on vacation, or I should say the deposed president on vacation. And the situation didn't happen quite in that scenario. He's certainly simplifying it to try to make his point. But what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at that situation and put some thought to the idea that we also may at some point in the fairly near future have to ask those same questions of ourselves. Excuse me. And when I say that, I mean we have a president and a Congress, frankly, and a judicial system that is clearly operating against the best interests of the nation at heart and as a whole. And the tumult in the Ukraine is not unlike what you could clearly envision happening here in the United States in the event something like the American Spring were to be successful. It starts out as a protest. Government responds negatively and improperly, becomes a revolt, and ends up causing the ouster of a leadership. What I want you to try to walk away from with this, and I encourage you to read the article first and foremost, because it kind of lays the groundwork for you to get a concept of how you can view this. But we really need to take a look at our own motivations and our own drives and determine how are we going to do this where we, one, retain the moral, ethical, and legal high ground. And I put legal last. I'll tell you why. If we do something immoral and unethical or illegal in our attempt to restore and preserve the nation, then we have become no different than the tyrants that are currently in power. Good cannot come from evil action, no matter how you try to rationalize that. And so, trying to make sure that we're aware of the boundaries and the limitations which exist, which are our own personal restraints. When I say that, I mean we have to restrain ourselves from acting improperly when we talk about the restoration and a revolution, if you will, in the United States of America. And I'm not talking about a violent one. I'm just talking about the idea that we can actually regain control of our elected government, remove those in power, replace them with those who will operate within the boundaries of the constitutional framework, and wash out and flush our national government and our state governments of the tyrannical aspects. Now, there's a lot of people who say, come on, man, you're dreaming. That's never going to happen. Well, you may well be right. I don't believe that there is enough critical mass in the United States that is yet cognizant, and I say yet, cognizant, of how far down the road of tyranny we've strolled. But I have no doubt in my mind that at some point in time, some event is going to trigger a reaction and a response from our national government and therefore our state governments that is going to be a very, very rude awakening for the majority of Americans who blindly and dumbly stumble through life, completely unaware of the risks that surround us at every waking moment. At some point, it may come to a stage when we have to say to them, we're not leaving until you do. It's time for you to go. We're sending you home, you're fired, and we're replacing you with those who have promised and sworn an oath to actually provide us with a better guidance, a better leadership than you. Now, does that automatically mean that we will achieve what we want? Not necessarily. I mean, we have to be mindful and cognizant of the fact that just because we want them to be, honest and bear integrity, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what we're going to get. But, and of course, that to a certain extent leads to the argument that I've thrown out before about, having these people commit in writing to a path, a cause of action. See, one of the problems that we have is that there's no one that stands above the crowd and says, and gives others who are stepping into the role an opportunity to view that person and say, there's someone I would emulate. The minute they get into the Congress, the minute they get into the presidency, they're so corrupted, and the pressure is so hard to just play along. But there will come a time when America will be enlightened to what's happening in our country. I don't know what the time and the date is for that. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm no Nostradamus. But it's at some point in time, the vast majority of America is going to awaken to the tragedy that we've allowed to happen. And it's happened before to us, folks. It happened during the Great Depression. You know, the country was awash in easy money and footloose and fancy-free, and suddenly everything changed. And it went on for a long time. The people who exited out the other end of history in the tunnel of the Depression came out changed. And it affected us for generations. Your grandparents, who lived through the Depression, today are the most conservative Americans that exist. Conservative fiscally, because they recognize that it's all transient. They are conservative in their viewpoints politically, in their approach towards resources. It only took the term of the Depression. Remember, it happened in 1929, and it ran basically until 39. I mean, realistically, it was a 10-year window. What pulled us out of it? Forget the idea that it was, political moves by the Roosevelt administration. That would be a lie to yourself. What pulled us out of it was World War II. And world wars, or just wars in general, are usually used to jumpstart or kickstart an economy. We're not the only ones who have done it, by the way. Look at Hitler. He dragged the nation of Germany from the, almost Zimbabwe-like inflation of the Weimar Republic and the complete collapse of their economy and their fiscal sovereignty to almost to the position of being able to take over vast segments of the planet. I mean, he made major mistakes along the way. Tactical mistakes I'm talking about. Forget the Holocaust and all the rest of that. I'm just talking about his military and the conquest concepts. He was almost successful. There were major, mistakes he made along the way, but none of that takes away the fact that he came pretty doggone close. Nations utilize wars to boost their economy, draw the people together. I mean, this isn't, some kind of a new concept to us. And we have to recognize that at some point in time, this nation is going to go through another, if you want to call it, and I don't want to say it's a Great Depression, but some kind of another cataclysmic event in the historical context that will transform the nation and swing the pendulum back the other way. We're now in the late 1920s. Easy money, a bubble on Wall Street, lack of self-governance, lack of self-reliance, complete and utter, just foolishness. Listen to the people who try to defend the policies of this government. It's impossible to even look at them and have any respect for them as individuals, because you can clearly see they're struggling to even come up with arguments that support it. watched a guy on Fox last night. He was a longtime Democratic strategist is what they called him. And this guy was trying to defend this extension of Obamacare and the completely just ridiculousness of it. And then he was trying to defend Obama's position on the world stage. I mean, the guy was struggling for words, and it wasn't because he wasn't articulate. It wasn't because he didn't know his subject. He's a longtime strategist. He's been pitching this same Kool-Aid for decades. It's just that even to the long-term supporters, the thing is so thin, it's hard to actually make anything out of it. Of course, his bread is buttered there, so he's not going to change his position in the midstream. And at this stage in the game, he's not going to turn around and say, for decades I've been misleading everybody who's been listening to me. The number one flaw in and the number one frailty of humanity. I'll never admit I was wrong, even when I know it. The truth is that it won't be long until we are at a position where we have to make a decision that is going to affect and dramatically alter the nation that we and the political leadership that we have. I can tell you this, and here's what I'm the exercise portion of this. I want you to think, if our situation was as the Ukrainians, what's within the boundaries of legal, moral, and ethical and constitutional behavior for us to move forward? If you take the Russian envoy's argument, and he says, he used the analogy that, the president had left the capital for a short term, and while he's gone, Romney comes in, gets together with Congress, they impeach Obama overnight, and boom, he now claims himself to be the new president and sitting in a coup de grace. Well, of course, that's not what really happened. The truth is the Ukrainian president fled, which is completely different than, going on vacation. There was no mistaking what he did, folks. And there's no mistaking the damage he'd done to his country. When I say that, I'm talking about the theft of tens of billions of dollars from their national treasury. But again, that just draws the correlation closer and closer and closer to our scenario with Obama. Now, I'm not suggesting that President Obama has absconded with billions of dollars of American money. But he has put us into debt with trillions of dollars that is going to be left to us and our progeny to pay off. And that may even be worse. I mean, realistically, think about it. At some point in time, and whether it's during the reign of Obama or the reign of the next traitor who takes the office, and I'll be honest with you, if it's Hillary Clinton, I'm telling you right now, any American that votes for Hillary Clinton is voting for tyranny. And if it's, any of the named, Chris Christie or something, you got to be kidding me. I mean, talk about desperation to save yourself by voting in the devil. Gee whiz. There are no leaders that, in my opinion, I would be willing to put my life on the line for. There's no one in there that I would say, that's my George Washington. No one. Maybe I could get behind a Cruz. Rand Paul, I got some serious doubts. And even Cruz, although he espouses that which I believe publicly, if he's willing to compromise away. I posted an article up on AVN the other day about how the electorate is unhappy about the fact that the GOP keeps constantly trading off our rights, and that there's no support for them. And they continuously mistake it and say, well, we can just take them for granted because they'll always show up at the polls. And let's go after the Hispanic vote. Let's go after come on. The truth of the matter is, if you guys would just stand for what you actually believe in, and you'd stop showing us by your actions that you're liars inherent, we'd support you 100%. And you wouldn't have to go after the X vote. But by doing so, you're just showing us that we were right all along. You're traitors. And you're willing to sacrifice us for power. It's a bad place for us to be. So, in your critical thinking exercise, put yourself and put our nation in the position of the Ukraine. How do we handle it? How do we respond? How do we react? What's right for us to do? And how do we do it legally, ethically, and morally? When we come back, I'm going to throw the second half of this scenario at you, which is taking a look at how the activity that's going on in the Ukraine and the militaristic rise of China might actually be the savior of America. We're going to look at something from the different angle. We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now.